South Africa's highest court will decide whether former President Jacob Zuma can be jailed for contempt. Hello, I'm Anand Naidoo and this is The Heat. In what's described as a turning point in the corruption case against Jacob Zuma, South Africa's Constitutional Court is expected to rule in the coming weeks if Zuma can be held in contempt of court. The former South African president has repeatedly refused to appear before corruption investigators, prompting the chief investigator to seek a 2-year prison sentence. The case has triggered what many are saying is a constitutional crisis in the country. It's led to the formation of a group called Defend Our Democracy, which includes respected anti-apartheid leaders who say the country's constitution and democracy are being threatened. CGTN's Angelo Coppola begins our coverage from Johannesburg. Angelo, let's start with the latest developments from the Constitutional Court. Put this in context for us. How did we get to this point?
Well, Anand, it all started with Zuma doing his best not to appear and give evidence at the Commission of Inquiry into those allegations of state capture, and then his behavior in walking out of the Commission in November last year. We were in the room at the time that Zuma skulked off at lunchtime, leaving the DCJ, that's the Deputy Chief Justice, almost speechless when his registrar called the room to order after lunch. It didn't end there, though. The Deputy Chief Justice short-circuited the legal process and went directly to the Constitutional Court to get a ruling, which he did. And they found Zuma, in fact, guilty of contempt of court, as you said, with the option of a fine or a 2-year jail sentence. On Thursday, the Constitutional Court full bench then heard argument for custodial jail terms, in fact, to be imposed with no option of a fine. The court has reserved judgment, and it could take anything up to 3 months before they hand down their ruling. Now, this isn't good news for the Commission of Inquiry, as it's likely to finish its business at the end of April. This after hearing probably from the last witness, and that's one Cyril Ramaphosa, the current president of the country. Of course, Zuma's behavior is consistent. He's been fighting to stay out of court in connection with allegations of corruption in the country's much disputed and talked about arms deal, and that's more than a decade ago. As an aside, Zuma, in fact, last night issued a 7- or 8-page statement after the Constitutional Court reserved that judgment, warning of what he called a judicial dictatorship emerging. Now, everyone's waiting to hear what the full bench of the Constitutional Court is going to say in the coming weeks or possibly months, but it could be sooner, Anand.
Angelo, now we have the Defend Our Democracy campaign. That's a newly formed group. What can you tell us about its leadership, its primary mission, and how is the ANC likely to respond?
Well, look, we've seen similar campaigns in the past. They start with a big fanfare and a big bang, and then they peter out. This time around, though, it appears that there's less party political involvement in the movement, and it's more a popular uprising or groundswell of support against Zuma as the initial target. It's been convened, as you said, by a cross-section of business, religious and NGO leaders, and until about Wednesday or Thursday of this week, around 9,000 individuals and around 70 organizations have signed up and called for the defense of the country's democracy and its constitution. The test, of course, will most likely be when there's a call made to demonstrate physically under the movement's banner. If that grabs the attention of the public in the country and they turn out en masse, then the ANC will have to react and take some decisive action. It does appear, though, that the ANC faction, there is an ANC faction that's in fact prepared to move at the moment. Businessman and ANC veteran Matthews Phosa has called for action by government leaders, speaking specifically to the president, to tackle corruption head-on. And that's from the man who, along with former President Kgalema Motlanthe and the ANC Treasury General, one Paul Mashatile, they've been tasked with developing ANC regulations, and wait for it, that will dictate when and how ANC party leaders must step aside from their official posts after being charged with serious crimes like corruption. That matter, of course, will apparently be discussed by the ANC's highest policy-making party or body at the end of March. Let's see how the ANC responds to this proposal, though. It could signal a sea change or a lack of commitment to change and fix the system as it stands. Anand.
Thanks, Angelo. That's CGTN's Angelo Coppola reporting from Johannesburg. For more on the developments in South Africa, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Johannesburg is Nhlanhla Sehume. He's a journalist and assignments editor for Power FM 98.7. Also with us from Johannesburg is Tabi Leoka. She's an independent economist. Mavuso Msimang is a co-founder of the Defend Our Democracy campaign and a former senior member of the African National Congress. And from Cape Town, Anand Naidoo is the executive secretary with the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution. Thanks everyone for being with us. Anand Naidoo, let me start with you. It seems that South Africa is at something of a crossroads right now with this case. The former president, Jacob Zuma, believes that he is not accountable to the country's courts, that he is in effect above the law. So how big a test is this for South Africa's legal system and for the rule of law in the country?
Well, it is a significant test. You know, yesterday the former president was charged before the Constitutional Court, the highest court in the country, for contempt of an order of that court, which was issued 2 months ago, which required him to go and give evidence before a judicial commission of inquiry that is investigating claims of state capture whilst Mr. Zuma was president. He's ignored the summons from the commission. He ignored the Constitutional Court yesterday. But the Constitutional Court will make a decision. They are more than likely to find him guilty, and the only real issue is what penalty they will impose, whether it will be a fine, a suspended sentence, or a direct sentence that will be effective immediately. But Mr. Zuma's will face the consequences for his disavowal of the rule of law and of the highest court in the country. Of that there is no doubt, that he will have to face the consequences for the actions that he has chosen to take.
So just to clarify this is not the first time that he is in contempt of court.
Well, no, this will be the first time that he's in contempt of court. There are charges that have been laid with regards to his previous failures to obey summonses that were issued by the Commission of Inquiry. But this is the first time that a contempt charge, and this is a contempt of an order of the Constitutional Court itself. So it's particularly egregious because it is a court of such high standing. And Mr. Zuma, as I say, chose not to defend himself in court yesterday. The matter proceeded in his absence, and a bench of the Constitutional Court of 9 judges heard the case and will no doubt pronounce on their verdict quite soon.
Mavuso Msimang, you are one of the co-founders of the Defend Our Democracy movement. You, together with other very prominent, widely respected veterans of the anti-apartheid struggle, formed this group. Why did you form it, and what do you hope to achieve?
The problem of corruption has been long in coming. You give it 10 plus years. Actually, a key point in the corruption that had been already in existence was the arrival of the Gupta family of business people, the Gupta brothers, who befriended the president and used this friendship to have illicit access, particularly to state-owned enterprises, with a view to having contracts and business that caused a lot of problems, in the sense that it became very clear that the people who were being appointed to the boards of these institutions were people who were handpicked by the president. Actually, a lot of the time, it's been suggested that some of the time under the direction of these Gupta brothers. Their aim was to facilitate the business, their business, through the friendship with the president. Things went worse. The corruption got to a point where in 2016, we had elections, provincial elections, something like, I think, local government elections, in which the ANC lost a lot of seats. They lost their majorities in a number of key metros. Cape Town had already gone to the opposition Democratic Alliance, but they lost Johannesburg, which is the seat of business in South Africa, Pretoria, the seat of government, and Port Elizabeth, called Nelson Mandela. Again, they lost overall majorities there it became quite clear that people were becoming disenchanted with the ANC. We of the ANC veterans tried very hard to talk to the leadership of the ANC and get them to step in and stop the corruption.
Right.
It was clear that
Just on that point, do you believe that your movement can do what the country's courts have failed to do so far, namely bring Jacob Zuma to justice?
well, what we intend to do is to really go to the ultimate defenders of the Constitution, which is the people. The aim is to appeal to the people to be part of a campaign to get public officials to be accountable. That's really, if the courts can't achieve that, this campaign, I believe, can do that. It's been very, very successful. We started out with 50 individuals who are recognizable in South Africa. 3 days later, there were more than 10,000 organizations. 700 organizations, and more than 10,000 people had signed up to be part of the campaign.
Okay, Tabi Leoka, you are an economist in South Africa. What kind of an impact does a case like this have on South Africa's ability to attract investment, especially foreign investment, at a time when the country is being hit very hard by the coronavirus pandemic, when unemployment in the country is running at record rates? It's now up to something like 33%. So how difficult does it make it for South Africa to get the kinds of investment that it needs when people look at this?
South Africa has attracted investment and continues to attract investment. The problem and the risk here is that we are rated, so we do subscribe to rating agencies, Fitch, S&P, and Moody's in particular. And in their assessment of the country, they do look at political risk, and also they look at our institutions. And if our institutions are continuously undermined by politics, and if the politics erode on the economics, then obviously we are going to be red flagged and likely to be downgraded as a result. Now, investors follow ratings, and they will respond accordingly. If we are downgraded, we see outflows of capital, and this is again happening time where the environment is not conducive for outflows. We cannot simply afford to have capital flows out of the economy. It would have very deep ramifications on the economy, on the currency, on inflation, which is currently low and supportive of a consumer that is really feeling the brunt of this pandemic. So it's not so much about the case itself, but how the politics of it erodes our economy, and also how our institutions, especially in this case, our legal institutions, handle this case.
And Tlhahla Sahuma, how is the South African public responding to this case? As I said, the country is reeling from a pandemic. It also is seeing very high rates of unemployment. I mean, what we're seeing here appears to be cases of high-level systemic corruption in the country. How are the public responding to it?
Well, Anand, institutional capture or state capture, as we've come to know it, it is both a symptom and a cause of the country's broader democratic crisis. Therefore, while there is this massive drive to curb the spread of COVID-19, the issue of fighting corruption has been on the list of government's top priorities. When referring to this case that you referred to earlier on, a lot has been reported in recent times of former President Jacob Zuma's defiance to present himself at a judicial commission of inquiry, state capture, to answer questions on his part in alleged corruption. So these allegations eventually ended the Zuma presidency back in 2018 and also prompted his alleged associates, the Guptas, to leave South Africa. So they also damaged the reputation of various illustrious firms that had done business with the Guptas. So state capture has blown a hole through the public finances, disappearing tens of billions of dollars from South Africa's most advanced economy. It is also very important to note that this scandal has also dealt a great blow to the reputation of the party. So many of Zuma's colleagues in the party have themselves also been accused of corruption.
Lawson, Foreign Policy magazine here in the United States ran a piece on this particular case. It says it believes that Zuma will in fact concede in this case. He will appear before the commission that's investigating corruption, and that he may even name other people who have been involved in corruption in the country. Could this be a turning point for this long-running case in South Africa?
Well, I think that's highly unlikely. I think Mr. Zuma has made it abundantly clear that he has no intention of cooperating with this Commission of Inquiry, even though he himself set it up when he was still president in January of 2018. He's shown consistently that he will use every trick in the book, legal or otherwise, to avoid having to answer very awkward questions. We must remember that Mr. Zuma has been implicated by nearly 40 witnesses who have on affidavit and on oral evidence under oath, implicated him in various aspects of state capture. So it's very unlikely that he's going to concede at this late hour and appear to give evidence. I think the Commission of Inquiry, even if it does not hear evidence from Mr. Zuma, has sufficient evidence before it to make adverse findings about Mr. Zuma's conduct, about his role in state capture, and ultimately the law enforcement agencies, the investigating bodies and the prosecuting authority will need to charge Mr. Zuma for the crimes that he has committed during his tenure as president, and which gave rise to the looting, as others have said, of billions of dollars of money, of public funds in South Africa, that has created, to some extent, the economic and social crisis that we currently now face.
Lawson, realistically, though, if the former president is found guilty of contempt, do you see him being put into prison in South Africa?
Well, there's no reason why that shouldn't happen. I mean, I think that a lot of the campaigning and the fight at the moment is about ensuring adherence to the rule of law, that nobody is above the law, whether it is a former president or not. And if the Constitutional Court finds Mr. Zuma guilty of contempt of court and it imposes a custodial sentence, Mr. Zuma will have to go to court, despite the protestations of some of his supporters that they will seek to protect him. That's unlikely to happen. It may lead to some minor ugly skirmishes, but at the end of the day, the law will prevail. The law has been stress tested, the Constitution has been stress tested, as have the judiciary, as they were during the years of Mr. Zuma's presidency, and they triumphed on that occasion, and the rule of law will triumph once again.
Mavusa Msimang, there is one seemingly insidious development in South Africa, which you have expressed concern over, and Lawson Naidoo mentioned that a moment ago. There are reports that Mr. Zuma has a following, that he can very quickly assemble a group that could turn to violence to protect him and keep him out of prison. You yourself, Mavusa, has talked about this. You talked about the existence of a militia that will protect him. What does this tell us about the legitimacy of the state if this can happen? I mean, this is basically descending into a gangster state if they protect the former president.
Well, absolutely. It shows the extent to which Jacob Zuma has become really reckless. He has a group of people. They were not even former Umkhonto we Sizwe or liberation fighters. These are people who have been just assembled, and they've been parked at Mr. Zuma's residence in Gandla. They wear camouflage uniforms. But I can tell you, my fear is that if they try to do anything stupid, the police would really crush them, and we might have a really nasty kind of thing. So they hope that they don't offer any opposition that's worth the name. But if they were reckless and tried to stop the police from carrying out their functions, then there could be harm if the situation is not handled carefully. They would be harmed. They just have no capacity at all to cause harm to the state.
Tabi Leoka, the amount of money that was looted from the South African Treasury, I mean, it's staggering levels of money that was looted. We heard earlier on from Mavusa telling us about this family that came over from India to South Africa, a family of 3 brothers who established a relationship with Jacob Zuma and had access, it seems, to the country's state-owned enterprises. What are the chances of South Africa recovering some of this money that has been looted? And to Lawson Naidoo's point, to what extent has this theft of the country's money impacted its economic growth and its social development?
Yeah, so I don't think we'll be able to get back the money that we've lost. And it already, I think, time has gone by, and it's becoming increasingly difficult for us to then get that money back. I think that if we did it soon after discovering that money was being looted, the chances would be higher. I think that, in terms of how much has been lost, it's very difficult to quantify, but we've spent around 160 billion rands from the fiscus trying to bail out state-owned entities. So state-owned entities are one of the biggest culprits in terms of the looting. And out of that 160 billion rand, 80% of that has gone to Eskom, trying to save Eskom. As you know, that we have an energy crisis in the country. We've been trying to build 2 power stations for the last 12 years, and we still haven't completed them. And because of the looting, this has impacted on our energy generation and also impacted on industries and households. We also have lost a lot of people who worked in state-owned entities that were highly educated, highly skilled, but unfortunately involved in some of this criminality. So that is something that the country will not get back, and we have to retrain and get people back into the pipeline and working for some of the state-owned entities. Many of our state-owned entities are currently in a very dire state. We've lost SA Express, which is an airline that is linked to SAA. SAA is still yet to recover. We have financial issues at Denel, which is our aerospace and military equipment company. I mentioned Eskom, which is one of the biggest state-owned entity. It's costing us dearly. We have also financial issues at SABC, which is the state broadcasting company. So it really is affecting a lot of our state-owned entities and the economy. If you look at other countries during the pandemic, it is state-owned entities that have helped these economies and supported their growth, and we're not getting that because of what has happened with state capture.
Right, you mentioned Eskom there, that's South Africa's electricity utility. When Jacob Zuma was removed from power and Cyril Ramaphosa became the president of the country, the ANC split into 2 groups. There were the loyalists for Zuma, the Zuma loyalists, and then there were those who supported Cyril Ramaphosa. How significant is this split, and how has it affected the ANC's ability to govern?
Well, this split has literally cut the ANC into 2 factions. And one view is that the focus on the Zuma faction is aimed at these short-term gains and being very individualistic, despite the opportunistic racial collectivist talk. Ultimately, they're also seen as politics of destruction, as opposed to the Ramaphosa faction as attempt to rebuild and seek organizational renewal for the ruling party after the ouster of former President Jacob Zuma. And the second fundamental difference between the political approaches of the 2 factions is that the Ramaphosa's faction, or the section of people in the Ramaphosa camp, seem to be under this impression that their opponents will be defeated by this rational methods. Therefore, it is a commission after commission and court case after court case. Much is being written about the so-called lawfare nowadays, the shifting of political contestation to the courts, which puts undue pressure on the latter.
Mavuso Msimang, the Defend Our Democracy movement has announced its formation. Thousands of people have signed a petition giving them their support for your goals. So where do you go to from here?
We have to consolidate the campaigning. A lot of the ideas will be passed through the internet and other means of reaching out to the people. The idea really is to say to the people, wherever you are, demand accountability. Wherever you see things like corruption, there is evidence of corruption and so on, just don't let go of that. tackle it. It's been done, by the way, in the past. There are areas where the civilian movement, civic movement organizations have stepped forward and changed the verdicts in the courts, like the arms deal, for instance, which was taken back to the court, a number of others. So there is a potential in South Africa for the civic movement to check corruption.
Lawson Naidoo, what of the political opposition in South Africa? What role are they playing in this? The biggest group, of course, is the Democratic Alliance, which is the main opposition group. There's the smaller group, but very vocal and far-left economic freedom fighters. How are they responding to what is going on?
Well, in terms of what's going on regarding Mr. Zuma and the State Capture Commission, the Democratic Alliance is really, I think, out of the picture. They've had a difficult time during the COVID pandemic. Government, in dealing with the pandemic, has by and large dealt with that quite well and left little space for the opposition to shine in that time. But when it comes to the Zuma matter, it's interesting that the EFF, the Economic Freedom Fighters that you mentioned, the third biggest party in South Africa's national parliament, has really sided with Mr. Zuma. The leader of the EFF, Mr. Julius Malema, infamously went and had tea with Mr. Zuma at his residence in Nkandla a few weeks ago, and there seems to be a coming together of these groups, and both of whom are likely to face the might of the law, because the senior leadership of the Economic Freedom Fighters is likewise implicated in large-scale corruption and looting, in particular relating to a building society or bank, the VBS bank. And they're likely to face the might of the law, and therefore are joining sides with Mr. Zuma and seeking to undermine the credibility of the law enforcement agencies, but also the credibility of the judiciary. So we're seeing a level of populist politics play out now as a direct threat to the rule of law, to the court processes. But ultimately, we believe with campaigns like the Defend Our Democracy campaign and civil society activism, and I think one cannot stress too much the independence of the judiciary in South Africa, that the rule of law will hold firm, and so long as the National Prosecuting Authority and the police do their work and bring the charges, people will be found guilty and will go to prison.
Mavuso, very quickly, I've got less than a minute left. When Cyril Ramaphosa came to office, he promised that he would end corruption in South Africa. But does he have the political will and the political backing to do this?
He's got the will to do that, but I must say, I have to say this, that he overrates the power of the opposition, of the people who don't like him. He could have really acted more decisively and dealt with the corruption when he came into government. He believed too much in negotiation, but we are really negotiation with people who are thuggish in their behavior. So that's why we've gone out and appealed to the people to assist the process of democracy.
Okay, that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidoo in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.